This week on In the Weeds with Jimmy Young, we travel to Holyoke, Massachusetts, a town of about 40,000 people just north of Springfield, known as the birthplace of volleyball and where the Volleyball Hall of Fame is located. It's also where Alex Morse is mayor. At age 22, he was one of the youngest ever elected to public office. Now about to turn 30, 8 years later, he's embracing the cannabis industry in his town, hoping to use the tax revenue to revive this former mill town just north of Springfield. He also joins me next on In the Weeds with Jimmy Young. Hi everyone, welcome to a very special edition of In the Weeds with Jimmy Young. We are here on location in Holyoke, Massachusetts, actually in the office of the mayor of Holyoke, Massachusetts, Alex Morse, and I'll be introducing you to him in just a moment. But a reminder, this podcast, once again, is available on iTunes, iHeartRadio, Audio Boom, and of course a video recording is being made for distribution on theweedtube.com. clnsmedia.com is our flagship website of the Cannabis Multimedia Network, and we are very, very happy to be in Holyoke, Massachusetts, bringing this to you. As always, In the Weeds is sponsored and supported by the Revolutionary Clinics, now with 2 locations in the greater Boston area, one on 110 Fawcett Street in Cambridge in the Fresh Pond area, and the other at 67 Broadway in Somerville. Revolutionary Clinics, as you know, that's where the patient comes first, and they have some of the best and most educated patient advocates that I've met in any dispensary in Massachusetts. And just so you want to get to know maybe one of these patient advocates a little bit better, here's Sarah telling us a little bit about why she loves what she does.
It's the best job in the world. So I was fortunate enough to get to be a teacher and a social worker before this. And there is nothing like having patients come back and say, I feel better. There's nothing better than getting to relate to your patients on the bad days and be there on the good. Being a patient advocate is a very special position because you are a pharmacist, you also get to work with the general public, and we're dealing with sick and scared people. Medical cannabis, adult use is great. Medical cannabis is a gift, and getting to work in this field is an absolute honor.
But now it is time to talk with His Honor, the Mayor, Alex Morse from Holyoke, Massachusetts. First of all, Mr. Mayor, thank you so much for welcoming us not only into your town, but into your office. I love this here.
Yeah, no, welcome to Holyoke. We're always happy to host and glad you're in Holyoke today and talk about a really important topic.
I appreciate that. And of course, one of the reasons why I am here is that you were one of the few public officials when Question 4 that passed to allow adult use legalization of cannabis, you were one of the few out there that actually supported it. Can you first explain why you were so pro-cannabis at that time?
Well, thanks again for being here, Jimmy, and you are correct. In fact, in 2016, I was the first and the only mayor to publicly support Question 4, and for me, it made sense for myriad reasons. Number one, from a criminal justice aspect, the war on drugs has been a massive failure in the United States and globally, really. And so not only has it been ineffective over the last several decades, but the impact it's had on people's lives today, black and brown communities in particular. And Holyoke's about 50% Latino, mostly of Puerto Rican descent. And so when we think about the folks in Holyoke whose lives have been hindered by prohibition over the last several decades, and that only through a legalized system, I think, could we address some of the harms of prohibition. And then number two, as mayor of a gateway city, of a community that is also, nicknamed the Paper City, a city that relied on industry, manufacturing, the first city in the country to make paper, the first planned industrial city. A lot of those jobs with deindustrialization, globalization, left the city. And so for us, we see this as an enormous workforce development opportunity, an economic development opportunity. The dispensing, yes, but in particular the cultivation, the growth of cannabis in some of these old mill buildings, creating potentially hundreds of jobs for Holyoke residents and generating the income we need to continue reinvesting those things we need to invest in our communities. So when I put those two together, I thought, and when you look at the facts and the information, I mean, everybody that looks at the information and data and statistics around the cannabis industry in a tax and regulated system should come to the logical conclusion that we're better off as a society when we legalize and tax cannabis.
Absolutely. You grew up in Holyoke.
Born and raised, yes.
You are truly a favorite son here.
I am.
And as a favorite son, I'm guessing that you had a very strong parental unit that helped you out. And tell me a little bit about your family and growing up in Holyoke. What was that about?
Yeah, so born and raised in Holyoke, and I went through the public schools here. I was fortunate enough to become the first in my family to go on to college when I got into Brown University. And my parents, I have two other brothers. My mom was actually born in Long Island. My dad was born in Attleboro, and they both grew up here and moved here as kids. They met as teenagers at Whiting Farms, which is a public housing complex here in the city. And so they grew up relatively poor, but they worked their entire lives to move up into the middle class. My dad's worked at a meat company in Springfield for 35 years, still there.
Nice.
And my mom opened up a family daycare when I was born and did that for about 15 years. And so, we love the city of Holyoke. Never did my parents imagine that I would one day become the mayor.
You mean you didn't grow up in third grade when they asked you, what do you want to be when you grew up? You didn't say, I want to be mayor of the
Not
town.
in the third grade, maybe in the ninth grade.
Interesting.
Always involved in politics and government. And my mom would always say, I don't know where you came from, Al. My dad would be watching ESPN. I'd say, put on CNN. I want to know what's going on
Nice.
in the world. And I've always taken a liking to it, how I can give back to my community. And Holyoke, and one of the reasons I ran is people often talked about, this. We used to have, booming downtown, right?
Mm-hmm.
We used to have all these manufacturing jobs. The schools used to be great. The city used to be safe. And people had sort of resigned themselves to the fact that Holyoke's best days were behind us, right? And I watched this narrative and internalized it growing up. And you start to believe, well, am I getting a good education in the public schools? Am I getting the greatest experience I can get in the city? And we're having these conversations at the very time we see the same people in elected office on the city council, on the school committee, in the mayor's office. And so for me, as I grew up and came into my own, went off to college, when tasked with what did I want to do, right? I made the decision to come back to Holyoke and run for mayor.
That's amazing. And at age 22, you ran for mayor and won, which is a tremendous accomplishment, for your life at this point. Any regrets?
Not yet.
Okay, good.
I mean, not today.
Not today, that's cool.
Yeah.
How, I would guess, you're 22 years old, you're running for mayor in your hometown. You had to galvanize your friends and family, the family's friends and all this.
Yeah.
Did you expect to win that race?
I did, and I beat an incumbent.
You
right?
beat the incumbent,
and
right.
She was 67, also a Democrat, and it wasn't about her, right? So I didn't run against her. I ran for something, and I think I could have been running against her. I could have been running against someone else that had been involved in Holyoke politics for so long, because the question really the voters were faced with is, do we want to continue the same type of people with declining outcomes in our public schools, crime going up, businesses leaving the city, or do you want to believe in a different direction for the city, right? A long-term vision, someone that had the passion, the energy, and the ideas to really get this city moving again. And so I think when I announced I was 21, people thought, well, that's nice. A young person wants to get involved in politics. It's great.
It'd be a great experience.
Send a message, good
Right.
experience.
Right.
You're not going to win this time, but it'll set you up for a nice city council run the next time around. And I knew that I didn't want to do this for fun, right? Like I wanted
in it to win it.
I'm in it
as
to
they
win it.
say,
I
right?
wanted
Right.
to run, and I knew that if I was going to do it, I needed to have great people around me, and I was going to work harder than anyone else. And that's what I did. I mean, we knocked on thousands of doors. I mean, people who've lived in Holyoke their entire lives, for the first time they had a candidate for mayor knock on their door, sit in their kitchens with them, in their living rooms, have conversations. We mobilized young people for the first time. We got the Latino community really engaged and represented in our campaigns. So it really was a true grassroots campaign, identifying our voters and getting them out to vote. And that made the difference. For too long in Holyoke, it was about who you know, what family you come from, folks sitting around in a boardroom and calling each other to put a sign up. But it's really about having those one-on-one conversations with people, and also providing a vision as to why you want to be mayor and where you think the city can go. And I think my opponents over the last 7 or 8 years have failed because they run against me instead of outlining as to why they want to be in this office.
And that, by the way, that's one of the things that drives me nuts about politics, especially when it becomes the presidential world. The negative ads that run, I think they should be outlawed, to be honest with you. I don't want to hear what you're doing wrong. I want you tell me what you're going to do once and if you get this job.
And you find the voter, and the data suggests too that when you're running, when you're excited about a candidate, you're not just upset about one candidate. You're much more likely to vote. You're much more likely to energize voters to come out when they're excited about voting for someone or for an issue that they're passionate about. So you can't scare people into voting. It just doesn't work.
Right. And now you're in your fourth term.
Fourth term, yep.
And it was a 2-year term, but now we're going for 4.
Yes. So I did 3 2-year terms, and then in 2015, the voters were kind enough to vote in support of a 4-year term. And so when I won my 4th term in 2017, I won my first 4-year term in the city's history.
Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you.
You know what? You're very well spoken, and the fact that you went to Brown University, I'm not going to hold that against you. I'm not an Ivy Leaguer, but I did go to Tufts. So,
very good school.
It is a very good school. I appreciate that, and I was out there the other day. The role that you see cannabis playing in your town, and I really want to talk more about where the tax revenue, where you think the tax revenue should go, and once we actually have a recreational facility in town.
Where I think the tax revenue from the cannabis industry
Where should it go? Where are you going to, you know what? Here's a bundle of money, Mr. Mayor, and it's found money, if you will. Where do you see the spend? Where do you think it should be spent?
Well, I think it's twofold, and I think we need to understand the economic reality of small cities like Holyoke that I think are chronically underfunded, where property values are lower, and so that has an impact on our school system, and also just maintaining public services, police, fire, Department of Public Works, the basic things that people expect from a city, right? So we, over the years, as I alluded to before, have seen economic downturn over the last several decades, and now over the last decade we've seen a resurgence of small cities like Holyoke. People want to get back to an urban community. They want transit-oriented development. And so we've invested a lot in public infrastructure. We still have more to do, but the cannabis industry in particular has replaced a lot of the jobs and industry that the city once relied on for its revenue stream to provide that level of public services that we provide and that residents are able to enjoy. And so first and foremost, I think it's making sure we can maintain the level of service we have. Second is how do we look towards the future and continue reinvesting in our community? So that's everything from public infrastructure projects. We've done 2 phases of the Canal Walk, which is a public infrastructure pathway along our 3 levels of downtown canals that help spur retail and commercial development, restaurants, art galleries, new housing projects. That's one example, continuing projects like that, reinvesting in our public schools. I was at an event last week in Boston. Our public schools, due to the outdated school funding formula, our schools are underfunded nearly $20 million, and so making sure every child, no matter where you come from, get a great education in the Holyoke public schools, continuing to invest in public safety. Holyoke is a community that is doing well given the resources we have, but we could be doing so much more if we had more funds to invest in those things that other communities have the luxury of doing.
Do you know, and it's funny, I've done a lot of research, a little bit of research anyway, on Holyoke and the town and the history. I understand property values have gone up under your administration, or sitting as Mr. Mayor. That's a great thing. Interesting story, I'm at seeing a doctor yesterday, and there was a new reading initiative moving into the same space. And on the dry erase board was the Holyoke Public Schools. And it was a K through 6 reading program. And anyone who knows anything about education knows you have to start early.
Yes.
And embrace the learning experience and create it. So I know that the Holyoke Public Schools are being proactive because I met this group that does early growth reading.
Yeah, and over the last 7 years, it's been a priority of our administration. So, the birth to 7 years old in particular, so by 3rd grade, making sure that young people are on track for literacy. And you look at 3rd grade reading scores, and that's oftentimes the determinant as to, whether or not this young person's going to be successful, graduate from high school and go into college. And, you have prison companies or whatnot looking at these third grade reading scores and predicting how many spaces they'll need for our young people, which is criminal, right? So I mean, our zip codes unfortunately dictate oftentimes the destiny of our young people, and so those are the things that we need to care about, is how can we change the outcomes for young people in our community before it gets to those points. So yeah, early literacy is definitely something that we've focused on.
That's great. And you've created some jobs because of the cannabis industry too.
Oh yeah.
You have there's a grow facility in Green Thumb, I think it's called?
GTI, yep.
GTI.
Down on Appleton Street.
And you took a big mill building and said, grow your stuff here.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great example, right? So we have, a couple of years ago, we had about 1.5 million square feet of vacant mill space in the downtown. Yep. So think about that. So that was 1.5 million square feet. I mean, that's almost a neighborhood in New York, right? So, and now you have 50,000 square feet of vacant space that once provided jobs and revenue to the city, a living wage for folks, and now it's reoccupied. You had GTI invest $10 million in that space, making it a state-of-the-art cannabis grow facility. You have 50 residents, mostly Holyoke residents, who live in that neighborhood, being able to walk to work, get a living wage. They're proud of what they do, and you have revenue coming back to the city, not only in the form of commercial taxes, but the revenue via the host community agreement. And so it's a win-win, right? And it fits into the neighborhood. They are good corporate citizens, and they're looking to continue investing in our community. And that's just one 50,000 square foot facility. Right now we have 7 companies that have been approved locally for a special permit. We have 13 companies that I've executed a host community agreement with. And then we have 31 companies in total that have expressed strong interest in coming to Holyoke, many of which have options on properties but are waiting to go through the local approval process and or the state Cannabis Control Commission process.
Let's talk about the host community effort, because it has been in the news very often now that there have been some backroom deals. The Cannabis Commission tries very hard to write the regulations and then implement them. They too have not sure they want to take on the host community agreements, but it does seem to be moving in that direction for them. Just what they need is more on their plate, but you know what? They're in it to win it now. They might as well try and figure it out.
They should.
Why do you think there is so much resistance to having it in my backyard after question 4 had passed?
I think there's still a lot of misinformation, and unfortunately a lot of it was led by misinformed elected officials and public officials that were spouting messages off to their constituents, right? So, I've come across, mayors, city managers, town managers, select board members that were against question 4 back in 2016, some of whom have seen the light since and have reversed their positions. You have West Springfield, right, which borders Holyoke, for example. Their mayor was against question 4 in 2016, but I presume had meetings with a number of companies and learned about the benefits economically in particular to his community, and then had proposed regulating it, despite the fact that the majority of West Springfield voters in 2016 voted against it. And so in those communities where a majority of voters voted against legalization, the city council now could ban recreational cannabis altogether. And so that's what the council ended up doing against the recommendation of the mayor. And so I give him credit for reversing his position and for trying to educate the council and the people of West Springfield. But at the end of the day, West Springfield Council decided to ban it altogether. Selfishly, when we're looking at Holyoke and trying to attract as many cannabis companies as possible, it's good news. But I happen to believe that every resident of Massachusetts should have equitable, accessible access to the industry, to a dispensary. And you shouldn't have to travel, hundreds of miles to get to a dispensary. There are people in every community that voted yes. It's legal. I've said this many times. I think anything you find at a dispensary is much safer. I mean, what you find at a local CVS is much more dangerous than you'll find at a dispensary. Same with a liquor store. And there's never been a reported overdose death from cannabis use. So, you tell people these facts and these figures, I think people, they move. But a lot of people have this historical hysteria around marijuana and cannabis.
It's the reefer madness syndrome.
Yeah, they define it as a gateway drug, even though the data doesn't doesn't show that it's a gateway drug. The biggest gateway drug, again, that we have are those things we find at our pharmacies, are opiates, and I think that's well proven.
That doctors prescribe.
Yes, and then you look at states like Colorado and those states that actually had medicinal marijuana, you've seen that overdose deaths have actually declined and opiate abuse has actually declined. I mean, people are actually using cannabis to get off of heroin and painkillers and everything else. So, I mean, it's a win medically, it's a win for the community. And anyone that's against cannabis use, doesn't want to personally use, wants to make sure we protect our young people, which we should be doing, should be in favor of a taxed and regulated system because it makes it safer as well.
Another thing in that question 4 in the law that's in place is a social initiative where the people who have paid a price by going to prison for minimal amounts of cannabis on their possession over the years should be given an opportunity to come in and get into the business. But as you know, in Massachusetts, it has really been the success, and the rollout of the medicinal program has been big money. Investors have got to come in. I mean, I have a friend who owns a dispensary, and it cost him millions of dollars just to open the door, because he had to go through all the lawyers and the filling out the forms and making sure everything was in order, and then the inspections, and everything's under one roof. It's awesome. But he was in debt for quite a few $1 million before he even sold one pre-roll, as it were. Is that social action? Is it working? It does seem to be one of those sticking points that hasn't happened yet.
Yeah, I would say it's not working yet. And if the state and the commission want to be serious about equity, there needs to be real money put up by the state, by the Cannabis Control Commission, that's providing both technical assistance and grants and funding to actually start up these businesses. I mean, I don't think a single person of color has gotten a license in the state of Massachusetts yet, which is
out of the 98 or
which is just an absolute shame. And so you have what's written in law and these goals and ambitions, and then you have the reality. And so I don't think the social equity program goes far enough. It also goes back to the host community agreement argument. I think the Cannabis Control Commission certainly have it within their jurisdiction already to do that, and so I agree with Commissioner Title in that respect. But I am glad that they voted recently to ask the legislature to give that explicit authority to the commission, because you do have mayors, you have elected leaders and policymakers around the state that are asking for too much. They're exceeding state law, and they're making it even more difficult for those folks that don't have the financial means to access the industry. And so I think that's dangerous, and I don't think it's good for anyone.
Now, in the past week, there has been an event in the cannabis business that was predicted all along, that once the industry launched and had some success, other companies might come in and buy them out. I'm talking about Netta. And sure enough, another group that has dispensaries on the West Coast, and I think they're out of Georgia, is where their base is, comes in, offers Netta a whole boatload of money.
But we don't know how much money, right?
No, I have not heard. Do you know?
No, they said that they...
Lots.
That's what I figured. Someone's making a lot of money.
Right, and I hope that there's some kind of a trickle-down effect to this, but because the same people will be operating the business that have really done a lot of sweat equity just to get this thing launched. So I think that's a good thing. Certainly a business decision like that. Do you see that? Is that going to be a trend? Are we going to see more of that, do you think? More out-of-state people coming in and buying out the people who started it in-state?
I think so. So it's not surprising what happened in Northampton with Netta. I think it was surprising with how quickly it happened, right? So, I mean, people saw that. And
I mean, they opened November 20th for rec, and it's January, and they've sold, right?
Yeah, it's happened very quickly, much quicker than I and others expected. I think we'll continue to see it. It's not only that they're coming in and buying companies after. I mean, even in Holyoke's case, I mean, GTI is a national company. I mean, granted, I'm thankful that a company that was organized and legitimate and knew how to enter the industry was the first company to go through the process, because it helped set the tone here with our city council, our legislative branch, that there is a good way to do this that's professional. It helped us get the business community on board, the Chamber of Commerce, to see this more as a business and industry. And so that helps set the tone. But again, how do we be more explicit about making sure there's licenses, that there's funding, that there's technical assistance for those companies that are based here in Massachusetts, started by Massachusetts residents, and are benefiting our community locally?
Yeah, and we're starting to see it. I don't know, is there any recreational licensees up in the Holyoke area? Are we looking at any retail operations going to open at any time?
Yeah, so we have 4 recreational dispensaries that have been approved by the city council for a special permit, have gone through site plan review.
Yep.
And so all of them, as far as I'm concerned, are still going through the state licensing process. So
Right.
we expect and we hope that there's at least a couple open in 2019. And we expect to see a number of more grow facilities as well.
Frustration about the slow rollout of this, or is it more that the governor of our Commonwealth wanted it this way? He really wanted us, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, to crawl before they walk, before they run. Have you seen that? Do you agree with that, or do you see that the Cannabis Commission is doing the best job they can, considering they're writing all these regulations from scratch?
I think the Cannabis Commission is doing the best they can with the restrictions and the political pressure that has been put on them by the governor and other elected officials. I do think it was unfortunate that a handful of state legislators, after legalization passed, voted in informal session to delay implementation by several months. I thought that was ridiculous.
It's counter to democracy, isn't
Not
it?
only counter to democracy, but if you wanted to write the regulations, if you wanted to take the lead on this, then you could have passed this through legislation, right? So
Right.
not only do you punt completely because you don't understand the industry, the voters have to do it, and then after the voters do it, now all of a sudden you want to tell everybody else how to actually write the legislation and how you want it, when you could have done that in the first place. So
Right.
we need to stop following and start leading on some of these big issues. I mean, Massachusetts touts itself on being number 1 and number 2 and everything, but we're behind when it comes to big issues like cannabis. And now you look at the industry, and we see district attorneys, attorneys general, state leaders across the country universally expunging records of folks that have been affected by what's legal now, right? And I haven't seen such action here in Massachusetts, and so it's been disappointing to see lack of action on this across the Commonwealth, frankly.
And I totally support that as well. Let's talk nationally for a minute, because I read a dozen newsletters every day of the various media that we probably, most pro-cannabis people will read and get up to speed on what's going on around the country. There's a financial investment in the lobbying effort in Washington, D.C. Of course, right now the federal government is being shut down, so nothing's getting done. But I'm going out on a limb thinking there's lobbying being done, because people are still looking for something to do every day. They're not just sitting at home trying to answer phones or whatever. Do you see, over the next 6 months, I'm going to say 6 months, an opportunity to reschedule cannabis before it is descheduled? In other words, taking it from that Schedule 1 category, and even if they move it down one notch to Schedule 2 and putting it alongside the cane industry, the Novocaines, the cocaines, and all of these other drugs that are Schedule 2, it will allow the banks to enter into the business. We all know that right now the banks are being held back by their FDIC regulations or whatever, their federal, to get involved. This, I think, has to happen sooner rather than later. You agree? How do you see what's going to happen?
I absolutely agree, because the impact from the federal government down has just had a negative impact, right? So, for example, we're trying to develop a workforce training program with our community colleges, and we've been able to do that partnering with C3RN, a few other organizations in the state. So we'll have one of the first workforce training programs specific to the cannabis industry with our community college.
Nice.
So we've had to be incredibly careful around how we fund that program, how we form it, who's involved, to make sure we don't put the college in jeopardy, right?
Right.
And then second, we have a network of the one-stop career centers around the Commonwealth, now called Mass Hire. So you have Mass Hire at Springfield, Mass Hire Holyoke, And so they can't even be involved in helping the local cannabis companies find talent. And so that typically is one of our biggest avenues to identify talent locally and match them up with the positions that are available. But largely, do I think we'll see a rescheduling of cannabis? I'm more optimistic than I was maybe last year. I mean, we saw the Farm Bill and hemp included in that over the last 2 years. And I mean, a pessimistic way to look at it, you know, Republicans now and the Republican lobby are seeing money in cannabis. You now see some of the biggest beverage companies in the country now getting involved in the cannabis industry.
And other countries.
Yeah, I mean, people see the money, right?
Right.
So, and money talks in D.C.
Yes, it does.
And yeah, a lot of our politicians are bought and paid for, right? So, and they listen to it. And when you look at the donations that people get and how they vote, and so, you know, you see John Boehner, the former Speaker of the House, sitting on the board of a national cannabis company. So the shift, it's already begun to shift, right?
Right.
And, you know, even with the, former AG Jeff Sessions, who was a huge opponent of pretty much everything, but marijuana in particular, had even agreed, the federal government's going to be hands off now with states that legalize. And so somebody is in these rooms talking to these Republicans about what's involved here, what's at stake. And I think they see the wind shifting. They see that there's no going back. And now I think they're trying to calculate, well, how can we take as much advantage of this industry as possible? So I wouldn't be surprised to see the administration take some action on this. There's been some public commentary here and there that suggests so, but the sooner the better. And I don't think we can wait until after 2020 to see a difference here.
Right, and I think it is amazing for someone my age, who was a child of the 60s and 70s and the counterculture and the protest era and all that. My home state has it legal now. I mean, and I'll be honest with you, and I'm all very honest on my show. I confess to a lot of things that I've done over the years. And I just can't believe that it's happened here in Massachusetts. I give the voters credit for, and the normal group, the MassCan folks that have the National Organization of Reform Marijuana Laws that have been in this state now for almost 30 years, they've won. And yet there's still the battle of the stigma of it. There's still the uneducated masses. One of the things that I wave my flag about, why aren't we seeing a public service announcement campaign about the benefits of cannabinoids? Again, you mentioned the Farm Bill. Hemp has 0.3% THC, the psychoactive chemical, in the plant. It's the same plant. They're going to look the same, but one's going to be producing a different quality of flower than the other. One will have a psychoactive, one will not have a psychoactive component. Why is it money? Is everything come down to money? Is it that the Cannabis Commission just doesn't have it in their budget to put together this public service campaign? Or is there not there is industry money because they're paying lobbyists in Washington to move forward on more reform? Why do you think there's still that hesitancy to do a public education campaign?
And you're talking about a public education campaign that
media. I'm talking
that focuses on telling people what?
First of all, I get the law, that yes, we need to educate people about the law, but about how to use this stuff and what are the benefits of it. And if you do suffer from arthritis or you do suffer from seizures, you can find relief using this product medicinally.
And a lot of that's been anecdotal, right? So it's a lot of folks from my generation educating our parents and our grandparents, because we see our parents, our grandparents getting prescription after prescription and spending money on, first, people are on just too many prescriptions and pills, right? I mean, doctors are just so happy to give you a pill, and we've internalized it so much that we only feel like we're addressing our issues if we have a pill to take to address it, and we think it's improving, and it's really not improving, but just psychologically,
the placebo effect's very effective when the doctor writes you the script. This will take care of it for you.
It's a whole mind game. And it's a whole mind shift that you need people to start thinking about. Well, how can I treat some of the underlying conditions that I have in a more natural way, right? I mean, these are products that are life changing for many people. I mean, I've met some of these people.
How many people have you heard say cannabis has changed my life?
I mean, from those folks who are fighting cancer, to those folks that have PTSD, that are veterans.
That's criminal, by the way, that the veterans have an answer to help out their fellow man, and they can't get it at the VA. it's criminal.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is criminal, and we should be doing more for that. I mean, a lot of dispensaries are providing additional discounts to veterans, and so I applaud them for that. But more needs to be done with benefits and insurance, and we just have a long way to go, right? I mean, for folks that actually acknowledge what the power of this plant. And that's why it's so, when you look at alcohol and prescription drugs and whatnot, how much damage it's caused us as a society, and how cautious we still remain over something that has so much potential to benefit so many people's lives in so many different ways. And a lot of the public dollars, unfortunately, have been used, well, fortunately, but also at the expense, I think, of investing dollars elsewhere, is, yes, don't use cannabis if you're under the age of 21, and here the impact on your brain, and all of that is good, and we should continue to invest in those ad campaigns. But how, again, do we target those folks in our community that would most benefit from the use of medical marijuana?
Right. And again, I've been a card carrier for 3 years, and I've thrown myself into the industry for a number of reasons, but one is just to find out what's the right strain. Now that it's regulated, what's this one going to do versus this one, and the different, the indicas and the sativas and the funny names that all the flowers have and all this. And it's helped. It definitely has helped me manage my chronic pain. It does not get rid of your pain. It helps you manage it, which is so important. Anyone who suffers from chronic pain should certainly look into this. What do you see your role being in the industry down the road? I mean, you're obviously doing a wonderful thing in your hometown, leading the way to accepting it, using it the right way as far as opening the doors of empty space and revitalizing your town. What do you think your role could be in this?
Yeah, I don't think my role in cannabis is limited to what's happening here in Holyoke, and that's why during 2016 I traveled around the state. I met with editorial boards of newspapers to convince them to endorse the legalization, to educate their readership as to why this was important on many different levels. It's why I was in Boston, and I lobbied folks and talked to voters outside of Holyoke, not just in Holyoke, as to why I support this. And now, I was on a panel a few weeks ago in Boston with the Mass Municipal Association talking about our host community agreement, which, by the way, is very fair. It's standard, very simple to execute. We're not extorting companies.
3% max?
Yep.
Right?
And looking at getting rid of that if it's different types of research. We want to make it as accessible as possible, and we're not treating others differently based on different things. I mean, you said that the industry is investing in lobbyists in DC. You have industry investing in lobbyists just to talk to mayors and councilors, and what a waste of money, right?
Right.
Make an appointment, come in, we'll talk about your business, and we'll make it happen if you want to be here.
Right.
And companies come in and they say, it's so refreshing. I don't have to pay a lobbyist to get a meeting with the mayor or with a councilor, or you actually want us to be here, and it doesn't have to be a battle, right?
Right.
And so now, so on that panel, for example, this is how we're regulating it in Holyoke. This is why I've embraced it. These are the benefits. These are some of the challenges and how we've addressed them. And so I've done that here in Massachusetts. I've also been invited elsewhere in those states that are considering legalizing, and a lot of the governmental officials, mayors in particular, are concerned about the local impact. And if I, as a mayor here in Massachusetts that is now has legal cannabis, can assuage some of those fears or concerns, talk about the way it's been rolled out, how to see it as an economic and workforce development opportunity, I think I can potentially be useful in paving the way for legalization in other places, not just here in Massachusetts.
Oh, that's great. Let's talk about the liberal arts colleges that are struggling. You mentioned you have a community college that is embracing it a little bit and starting to train people. And there are so many different aspects of this industry. There's the economy, obvious. There's botany. There's the legal side of things. There's so many different elements that lend itself to education. Do you think some of these struggling liberal arts schools, there's some in the backyard here, not in Mount Holyoke, but another one out here in Western Mass, Hampshire College, is starting to struggle.
Look at its future, yeah.
And I'm like, why wouldn't they embrace this? I mean, it's sitting right in front of them. And you would think that if you have a 4-year university that has a cannabis educational program, they're going to get some publicity and they're going to get plenty of applicants.
Absolutely.
Do you see it as that this is a tool that can perhaps save some of these schools? And what happened at Mount Ida is horrible too.
Yeah, no, I agree. And It is, because I don't think you see a four-year college in the nation right now focusing on a state-of-the-art program for the cannabis industry. So particularly those colleges that aren't funded by the government, right? I mean, not public universities or colleges, but private colleges that have their own private endowments can really be innovative here with this industry. Again, it's going to take some time. We now have a community college that's developing a program in a legal way, which I think is going to be first of its kind in many ways. And because we're setting an ambitious goal. We want our companies here in the city that at least 25% of their employees live here in Holyoke, with the hope that they'd hire more. But with that condition, we want to be able to say, hey, not only do we want you to do 25%, but here's a whole pool of Holyoke residents that have gone through our training program at Holyoke Community College that are ready for you to hire. It's a win-win. I mean, we have about 1,200 what we consider chronically unemployed folks in the downtown, the center city of Holyoke. And we need to make sure that those folks in particular are trained to get the openings that we have in this industry. We don't want folks from the outskirts of town or even out of town to come in and fill all of those positions. So we feel incumbent upon us to make sure that residents have access to that industry. So, for colleges like Hampshire, other universities, they should certainly be looking into workforce. I mean, liberal arts colleges oftentimes pride themselves on, maybe not so much focusing on a technical, like this is going to be your job. Hampshire's also been known to be very out of the box and creative and innovative.
No grades, right? No grades.
Although we didn't, I mean, we had grades at Brown, but it was
yes, you did have grades,
a little different,
and at Tufts too. I might add. Yeah. By the way, how many resumes do you look at of college students who graduate and they put their GPAs on their resumes? Does that really make that much of a difference when it comes to hiring the right person?
I don't even look at the GPA.
Thank you very much.
Look, it's funny, at Brown we didn't do GPAs really, and you didn't do class rank, and so
that's interesting.
It was very collaborative, everybody worked together.
Let's teach these people things and skills that they can use in the real world. I listened to my pseudo stepdaughter talk about the fact that she isn't getting the kind of education she wants from her college she's graduating from, and she goes, I don't even know how to balance my checkbook or know what it, I always look online and do it that way, but it's there's a frustration about our education system too.
Yeah, and those are basic things. I mean, I have the Mayor's Industrial Development Advisory Committee. I meet with our manufacturers in town, and that's the biggest complaint: workforce development. How are we teaching young people the basic life skills they need to just get jobs? I mean, how to
get a mortgage,
anything. I mean, financial literacy. I mean,
right.
Civics engagement. I mean, those are basic things. I know the state has made some progress as of late on financial literacy, on a civics education bill. Those are the type of things that we really need to focus on our young people. And nationally, just changing the conversation around vocational and technical education, and the cannabis industry can certainly be put in that category.
Well, Mr. Mayor, you have been awesome. You have lived up to your reputation. It's one of the reasons why I took the drive out here.
Oh, well, I appreciate that.
To meet you, because I'd heard so many good things about you. And I really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy day to sit down and chit-chat a little bit. And we'll wave the flag on the other side of the state for you.
Yeah, please do. And again, I appreciate you providing a platform for this topic in particular. I think it's really the issue of our time, and we need to make it as important and known as we can. So thank you.
Terrific. Well, that was Mr. and the Mayor, Alex Morse of Holyoke, Massachusetts. And I just want to again thank him for that. I also want to remind you that this podcast is available on iTunes, iHeartRadio, Audio Boom, the clnsmedia.com network, and the video recording of it is on theweedtube.com. You should check out the Cannabis Multimedia Network.com website. It's something I'm very proud of. I put this thing together over the last few weeks. I've got some of the biggest names in cannabis involved with it, including Sensi Magazine, including Greenflower, Weed Maps, Leafly, and the MJ Headline News. As you probably know, I too am pro-cannabis, and I support the cause, and I think the more you learn about what's going on, the more you will embrace this. And if you haven't tried it for the first time, get educated, walk into a recreational facility, ask your questions. They will have the answers for you. So with that in mind, again, we are supported by the Revolutionary Clinics in Cambridge and in Somerville, 2 locations where you can find some of the most educated patient advocates in the area. They always hold open educational nights, and I urge you to get involved with that. So For Mayor Alex Morse, our technical director Steve Helmuth, our executive producer Joyce Gerber, I'm Jimmy Young. We'll see you next time on In the Weeds with Jimmy Young. In the Weeds is a podcast produced at the studios of Little Park Media in Wellesley, Massachusetts for the listening enjoyment of our audience. None of the opinions or advice on this program should be considered medical advice or a substitute for seeing a certified medical marijuana practitioner or your local physician. All opinions and thoughts on this show do not necessarily represent the management of CLNS Media Group or Little Park Media.
This is CMN, the Cannabis Multimedia Network.